Thank you very much for giving me this opportunity to talk about my book. Rahul Shastri ji, Valleshwar ji, Ayush ji, and other volunteers of Sambit Kendra. I'm very happy and glad to be here talking about the book. Here, and this is a wonderful experiment that we go to the community and organize this, gathering like this. I think this is a wonderful idea, and because ideas come from these kind of gatherings, and so this book, Western Media Narratives on India, Gandhi to Modi. This idea, I just want to let you know how this idea came. This is a very old idea in my mind. And all of you would have, as IT professionals, would have felt certain things. And let me tell you one personal episode which has nothing to do with the book. As a journalist, I was invited to Germany in 1996 to look at their elections and other things. And I visited many places. I would go to Bonn, Berlin, Frankfurt, everywhere. And I was a state guest, invited by the government of Germany. But at each internal airport, you would feel that there are 100, 150 people. They will pass after the security while alighting. Most of the time, the security will check only my bag. Random. And this random identification is very random, huh? It's so obvious. 100 लोग निकल जाते थे, मुझे ही पकड़ के वो मेरा पूरा बैग खुलवाता था. And he had my letter. And this, most of us would have felt. So, at places, and I'm using this word very carefully, but with full responsibility, that this racism is evident everywhere. Nuances have changed. A Churchill will call us by names, but it is not no more possible in this more connected world. But the essence remains the same. It has not changed. And I've dealt with this fundamental issue of colonization of minds. If you were to ask me about my book in one sentence, one phrase, my book is about colonization of minds. Western media is an important tool of that. And I have many stories in this book. And this idea, when I was a student, I remember reading an article in Time at that time, and I'm talking of 70s. And there was an article about India growing, etc., etc. But in that article, there was a mention that this is a country where, you find cows on streets and cows on highways. So, whenever they write something, there would be some masala tadka of this. So in 70s, they will write like that. In 2014, 2022-23, when Chandrayaan was launched, and I've narrated that incident here, a BBC anchor would ask their BBC Delhi correspondent, India correspondent, oh, you've launched Chandrayaan, and then, but 60 crore people in India do not have toilets. So why should India be spending money on ISRO? That's the questioning. As if two were very related incidents, two were related things. Does it mean to say that humans should not invest on science and technology and education till every stomach is fed? Does growth happens of the human civilization in a linear fashion? Does it happen in the UK, for example? And I've narrated this in my book. As per UK government data, the 20% Brits are poor, as defined by them. So, if 20% Brits are poor, why the hell are you spending so much money on 74 years old king's coronation? Why? Why that question should not be asked of you? Why BBC is showing it live? Sadly, these questions are not asked of them. As if they are headmasters of the school, masters of the school, they have all the right to ask these questions to us. So I was talking how this idea came to me. One incident I gave you, another incident when I was in JNU, I happened to go to Canada for 3-4 months. That was summer of 1983. India at that time was in turmoil. There was a terrorism in Punjab, Sikh terrorism, Khalistani, not Sikh terrorism, that's a wrong word. Khalistani terrorism was on the peak. At that time, Home Minister of India was Mr. Gyani Jail Singh. Mrs. Indira Gandhi, then Prime Minister of India, chose to make Gyani Jail Singh as the President of India. I was in Canada, and Canada, there's a huge Punjabi population, Sikh, non-Sikhs both. So much so that when you travel by Air Canada, announcements at that time even were made in Punjabi. Air Canada ਵਿੱਚ ਤੁਹਾਡਾ ਸਵਾਗਤ ਹੈ. It will start like this. There were many places in Toronto where signages were in Gurumukhi. So, as a student of international relations, I thought, मुझे बड़ा लग रहा था कि ये खबर कहीं है क्या? And you know, those were the times when you were IT professional, there were no IT, there were no cell phones, there were no television, live television in Canada from India. So there was only way to get news is from newspaper. But sadly, the local newspapers which I used to get there, and at that time newspapers were free there, almost free. You put some cents there and you could pick out from boxes like that. But this news was not covered there. And it baffled me. Those 3 months there was only one news about India. Only one news. That was some pilgrims were going to a temple and the bus fell into a ravine and 30 pilgrims were killed. 30 Hindu pilgrims were killed. And pilgrims, if they are Hindu, Hindu has to be written. Others, not. That's the principle even today. So a Narendra Modi government is a Hindu nationalist government, and Imran Khan's government is a Pakistan government. That's not a Islamist government. Even Britain's government, which is by constitution a Christian state, the head of Britain, that is the king or the queen, is the head of the Church of England. That is not written a Christian government. But that's how, names are given. So I wondered why only an incident, an accident becomes important, whereas a president election, that too a Sikh president, that too during a militancy, does not warrant even a single column news in Toronto. And that question always bothered me. I was a student. That time I wanted to do, Rahul sir, PhD on the subject. In fact, I registered for PhD, and at that time the topic of my PhD, which I registered, which I never completed, I got into journalism, and journalism doesn't give you time for anything else, not for your family even. So the topic, the approved topic of my PhD at that time was third world crisis situations and Western media. And there were two crisis situations that I wanted to discuss. One was Iranian hostage crisis. If you will recall, Iranian students had laid siege to American embassy in Tehran for some 1980. And also Colonel Qaddafi's rule in Libya. These were the two case studies I wanted to do. And I did my bibliography and wrote a proposal and all that. So I'm coming to my book now. So during COVID, I was searching through my papers. I got that PhD file with me. I saw, this is a topic which... And then I was doing, and Ayush we used to discuss COVID situation every day on call, almost every day. And my job was to read international newspapers. And for about 1.5, 2 years, every day I would go through Wall Street Journal, New York Times, Washington Post, BBC, CNN, Time, The Guardian, The Telegraph, South China Morning Post, Gulf News, and so on and so forth. Now, when as a journalist, I was looking at COVID. Now, it was a terrible time for all of us. Terrible time. I don't know if there would be any soul even in this room जिसके एक फोन कॉल अबे कोई ना कोई तकलीफ नहीं हुई. And it was a terrible time for entire world. India was a victim of COVID, like other countries were. So, when we were victims of COVID, it did not originate in our country. Where it originated, it started from Wuhan. The first case in India was from Wuhan. There's a girl from Kerala on 30th January 2020 that was declared. All right. So, now, we were as much a victim of COVID as any country or any society was. But the reporting in most of these Western media from day one, was very negative. Very negative. And it sounded bells in my head. Why So I could, trace that this is not today. Then I started to dig and read a lot. And then I realized, oh, ये आज की बात नहीं है, ये गांधी की बात भी नहीं है, गांधी से बहुत पहले की बात है. It is a civilizational and cultural issue. Us, or societies like us, developing societies like us, are depicted in a certain way, are painted in a certain way, so that they remain as they are. There is a speech by Churchill in 1930. You should search and read that speech. The title of that speech is Our Duties in India. And he talks about, at that time, there was a debate about home rule to be given to India. And the first roundtable conference was due. Before that, Churchill wrote that, gave a speech, and Churchill was a very prolific, also a speaker and a writer. He used to write in Daily Mail. He's one of the very prolific journalists, and it's a hero for them, not for us. If you read that speech, you will feel aghast. You say, what are these talking about? Is he talking about India? Our civilization? And I've quoted that speech in that Churchillian thought that we are ungovernable, we are not cultured, we need to be taught everything, we need to be taught sanitation, we need to be taught administration, we need to be taught how do you behave. That Gandhi was a representative of a Brahminical order, and he talks about castes and marshals and the marshal, who is Marshal Corp, all those kind of things. I'm not dealing with that subject now. I'm not a historian. I'm a student of history as a journalist. Now that Churchillian idea, and he says in that speech that if a few thousand officers of British government are withdrawn from India, India will go into deep medieval-like situation. Barbarism. That is what he used. So this culture, entire issue about cultural imperialism is that societies like us need to be cultured. And this issue of who is cultured and who is not cultured, I think some French philosopher discussed it around 17th century, and they defined who is cultured. In nutshell, the one who is urban, settled, and educated. So urban, settled, educated. So India, by definition, we have been predominantly a rural economy. We are not culture. So culture कैसे जाएगी? Through evangelism, through imperialism. And I've given you examples. What Vasco da Gama said when he started to come to India, what Columbus said, what Sir H.M. Stanley said, the ideas there. So we were to be cultured. But the fact is, even when we were not cultured as per their definition, in 16th and 17th century, with predominantly a rural economy, India had about 25% of world GDP. And there is an Angus Madison report which I've quoted here. In 1600 it was around 24%, in 1700 it was around again 27%, and when British came and cultured us, educated us, brought growth and development, it started coming down, and when they left, it was around 4% in 1950. So that is so much about culture and so much about development and progress. The entire enterprise of imperialism is based on this concept that others are not equal to Western societies. And Western media plays this narrative day in and day out, even today. Make no mistake, we may think, oh, now with social media, with digital, with empowerment, these are very fantastic words. And sometimes we also get taken in by them. The fact is that narrative is much more stronger today. And I know there are IT professionals here, and we can have a debate whether this democratization of entire media is correct or not. Yes, there is some difference, yes, but I do believe, firmly believe, that never in human civilization, never ever, the dissemination and storage of content was so monopolized by a few companies. It was never cartelized like that. And this cartelization of information business is not happening today. It started, and I deal with it in my book, it started in 1800s when the World News Agencies in 1860 entered into a quadrilateral agreement. As per that, the world was divided onto kind of imperial domains, and each agency, AFP, AP, Reuters, and Wolf, they were given some areas, exclusive zones they were called, and nobody else was allowed to cover that. So much is for inclusiveness and freedom of expression. And that agreement continued till First World War. After the First World War, there were some national news agencies came, and I'll give you another episode from the book that is about when India got independent. Press Trust of India was formed, and Reuters entered into an agreement with PTI. And as per that agreement, area from Cairo to Singapore was given to PTI to cover. That it was an exclusive domain of PTI. And PTI established a news center in London, in the Reuters headquarters. So any copy coming from these areas will be vetted by the PTI editor. But as soon as this agreement started to be implemented, Reuters bosses had a very problem. फ्रीडम ऑफ एक्सप्रेशन का बहुत नारा देते हैं ना अभी, और एक इंसिडेंट है, बड़ा फनी इंसिडेंट है, बताता हूं मैं. क्या हुआ कि कराची के अंदर, इन कराची there was a Mahatma Gandhi statue which was broken by some of the miscreants. Now the Reuters correspondent wrote a story that there was a gale in the night, so the statue fell down. Pakistan was to be handled with kids' clothes. And the PTI correspondent checked, the desk checked, they said no, and they changed the copy. Now, it was never, they never could digest this. Just come on, Indians are telling us what is news and what is not news. And also, how India was depicted. There was a serious disagreement on that. So, Reuters wanted to renegotiate the agreement in 1953 when it came for renewal. And they put clauses. उन clauses का मतलब यही था, तुम कुछ भी करोगे यार, हम basically हम तय करेंगे final news क्या होगा. And PTI wrote to Prime Minister of India, Nehru at that time. He said, I can't intervene because I am Prime Minister, but I am interested in foreign policy. Their Prime Minister, Nehru also writes that to say that Reuters an independent agency is far from truth. It's a British agency. And it serves British interests. So this is how narrative building goes on. And I can go on and on, but I will narrate one incident which is related to Hyderabad, and then I'll sum up my things, and then we can have question answer. We are sitting in Hyderabad, and what happens when integration of Hyderabad is happening, and how narrative building is done. And then I just want to add, narrative building, media is one outpost. There are many facets of narrative building. Educational institutions, NGOs, international institutions, think tanks, they're all part of this whole ecosystem of narrative building. Media is what we see. वो कहीं से भी शुरू हो जाता है. A report will come by one agency and media will pick it up. New York Times will write an article, Indian newspaper will pick up, and it becomes a big story. And it will be discussed in Indian Parliament. So same thing happened with Hyderabad integration. September 48. So on 17th September, if I am correct, Nizam signed the instrument of accession. 2 days before that, 15th September, a British newspaper publishes a report. It says that Government of India, and especially Patel, was not adhering to standstill agreement. He is what the British government has entered with the Nizam. He is not following any rule whatsoever. And he was painted like a villain. Interestingly, that day, House of Commons meeting was happening. सब कुछ coincidence से होता है, ऐसे coincidence नहीं होता. That report was published. The leader of opposition, Anthony Eden, raised this issue in the Parliament, House of Commons, and said, look, such a serious situation is happening in Hyderabad, and if in all dominions this happens, what will happen? Now the government of UK at that time could have said that, look, it's an internal matter of a sovereign country, we don't intervene. No, they allowed a full debate on the situation in Hyderabad. And then Eden said that a Security Council, UN Security Council meeting was to happen in 2 days, that this matter should be taken to UN Security Council, and incidentally, UK was the president of chairman of the UN Security Council at that time. So, using a newspaper report, they got sanction to go to the UN Security Council. Another interesting thing, Very, very interesting thing. In the same debate, same day, question of Burma, disturbances in Burma also came up. And Burma, I suppose, got independence a few months after us. I suppose in January 48. We got independent in 47, August 47. And when that issue came up, you know what, in the same debate, the US Foreign Secretary, the UK Foreign Secretary of State, not Foreign Secretary, he said, look, our sympathies are with the government of India or government of Burma, and we are sure that they will be able to tackle the situation. That's it. How narratives are made, how newspaper reports are used to serve your strategic interests. And there are a number of other, about COVID, why, how and why New York Times said that 4.2 million people have died in India of COVID. That's a report. They reported that. I've given so many, I don't want to read the entire book here. So why does Western media do it? One, Western media is not an independent watchdog. It is an entity created by the entire imperialist enterprise. Its job is to save the existing power equilibrium in the world, not to disturb it. So we think, oh, उधर आया तो बड़ा independent है, बड़ा साफ है, एकदम gospel है, क्या बोलते हैं? Not true, not true. Its job is to preserve, nurture, and make sure the existing power equilibrium in the world remains as it is, which is in favor of the Western powers. So anybody disturbing that, anybody asserting more than they think he or she should do, there is a kahani starts building. So Modi is good as far as China is in balance, checked. But beyond that, you will find it has also already started coming. And after June 4, 2024, you will find many stories. Doubting elections, doubting this, doubting that. It is to cut to. And it, again, as I'm saying, it is not specific to one individual. Narendra Modi represents India. He is an elected Prime Minister of India. Anybody who represents India, who is assertive, who believes in civilizational values, will be attacked. He happens to be our Prime Minister at this time. He is very assertive. He is saying India should get its rightful place in Committee of Nations. So my book is about this. And I've researched for it for 3 years. It has more than 300 primary sources cited in the book. Believe you me, बड़ी छोटी सी किताब लगती है. आप 4-5 घंटे में पढ़ लेंगे, 2 घंटे में पढ़ लेंगे. मुझे लिखने में 2-3 साल लग गए. मुझे नहीं मालूम था. राहुल शास्त्री ने तो बहुत सारी किताबें लिखी हैं कि किताब लिखना, मैंने सोचा मैं भी शुरू करूंगा. somebody asked me कितने दिन, 6 महीने में पूरा हो जाएगा. And I was calculating. एक आर्टिकल लिखते हैं around 1000 words. We write in 2-3-4 hours उसके लिए पढ़ते हैं. I said 1000, even if I write 200, 300, 400 words every day, it should be done in 6 months. But I started going into it. For each and everything, I had to search, I had to look at. I have quoted what New York Times wrote in 1911, And you go to the primary source, you cull out that article, and you read it, you then, in just that, what New York Times wrote in 1911, the 3rd September 1911, the heading of the article is India ripe for Christianity? The title says it all. Ripe for Christianity. Then it goes on to say that the Hinduism is nothing but fatalism. And this needs to be eradicated. And this, then it goes on to say, sadly, there are very few missionaries to spread the gospel in India. How we are going to do it? So when it does it there in 1911, and when freedom of religion report comes from US Congress, there is no difference. Words are different, nuances are different. How is being written is different. Same. So, मैंने जैसे कहा 3 साल लगे हैं, आप भी 2-3 घंटे निकालिएगा तो अच्छा लगेगा, कुछ आपको मसाला ज़रूर मिलेगा, and it will raise more questions than answers. And I think if, as a civilization, as a proud civilization, as a civilization which has a history, which has a very proud history of inclusiveness, which is, you know, हमसे ज़्यादा inclusive कौन हो सकता है, जिसको tolerant, intolerant आज बोलते हैं, एकम सत विप्रा बहुधा वदन्ति, ये इससे ज़्यादा tolerant कौन हो सकता है? But we are told, oh, you are intolerant. But as a proud intellectual warriors, I think it is incumbent upon us to to ask right questions, and I think our next generation will find right answers also. So this book raises some questions which are very fundamental questions, and do read, appreciate, go on Amazon, give it some likes or write reviews, because in which is bestseller or not divided by those algorithms, and not by me if you are reading only and sleeping. So do that. Thank you very much for inviting me here. And this is the book authored by Umesh.